Signed only by Democrat senators, this week confirmed what many had suspected all along about the brutal techniques such as waterboarding used by the CIA to interrogate terrorist suspects after 9/11. Some commentators suspect Democrats are making the revelations public now to try to attack their Republican opponents under whose watch the incidents took place. So were the interrogation methods used after 9/11 morally indefensible? And just how morally different is President Obama with all of these drone strikes? How different is his approach today? We turn to writer and commentator Douglas Murray. This is his take of the week.
Services. Otherwise, we will all pay the price.
Hit me, baby, one more time.
And from the briefing room at the Henry Jackson Society in Millbank Tower to our own little briefing room here at the BBC's new broadcasting house. Welcome back, Douglas. Now, isn't it a bit of an understatement when you say, quote, the CIA may have fallen short of America's highest standards in the period after 9/11? I mean, it isn't the truth, is it? The CIA employed torture on an industrial scale.
Well, I do think it's worth bearing in mind, first of all, before getting to the allegations, that the dispute over this report, the Republicans on the committee did not agree with the findings. In fact, they stepped away quite early on. It's also important to remember that the inquiry did not ask or speak to and get evidence from any of the people who are actually serving at the top of the CIA at the time that this was meant to be going on. And that is a serious thing. Now, both the minority report and the CIA strongly dispute a lot of the major findings in this. But then But
do you deny that there was some serious interrogation which in most people's eyes would be torture?
Absolutely. No, I don't deny that. And it's clear, even from what the CIA is willing to say, that has happened, and what it concedes is that on a number of occasions they undoubtedly went far beyond what was meant to happen. And that is the sort of thing which is why we need inquiries like this. And can I just, one other point, you know, the late Democrat Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan said, and it's a very true thing to say, he said, the number of human rights complaints in a society tend to be in exactly inverse proportion to the number of human rights violations in a society. In other words, we hear about this in America. We've heard about this in recent days. In fact, we've heard about it over recent years precisely because America is the society it is. And we have to be very careful, I think, in criticism.
I'm horrified. Would seek to minimise what went on. It wasn't playing Kylie Minogue on a loop or slapping people. It was pumping fluids up people's rectums until their insides burst. It was making people stand on limbs which were broken in two places for hours and hours. One man died as part of this process of torture. Douglas, you and I were both British. Sure. When did the British systematically condone torture?
No,
let me finish. Okay, surely, if British values mean anything, there may have been slips, there may have been things we didn't do that were perfect, but if British values mean anything, we do not condone torture. Let me say one more thing.
No, let him come back. You've had a very good say.
It's a very important point. I agree with you, Dan. All of us are against torture, as I said in the film. The problem is there are a set of degrees. There is no question, Dan.
Well, what about the degree that Diane
exactly,
described?
There's no question.
I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that unless you start hacking up people's...
If that did occur, and the CIA and the minority representatives dispute that it occurred, if that did occur, Diane, obviously that's wrong. Obviously that has to be addressed, and we hope that it will be in the weeks and days ahead.
Shouldn't the people, if they did this, shouldn't the people who did this, shouldn't they be charged?
Can I just come back to the more...
Shouldn't they face a court?
Can I just come back to the important thing that Diane's raised? When have we behaved like this?
No, I didn't say when have we behaved like that. I said when have we, as British people, condoned torture. Can I finish my point?
As I said in the film, these things are very messy. On 9/11, America lost more people than this country did for 30 years in Northern Ireland. And let me give you a quick example. Incidentally, you can read about it in my book on Bloody Sunday, which talks about the violations this state did in Northern Ireland, not just the gunning down of people. Let me just give you an example. There was a period in Northern Ireland in the 80s when this country allowed a person who became the head of the internal nutting squad in the IRA, the man who tortured and executed people within the IRA, to operate. He was a British agent, Diane. His name was Steak Knife. And do you know, Diane, that he was allowed to kill innocent people who the security services knew to be innocent and torture and kill them to keep his cover?
That's what I'm saying.
No, of course, but what I'm saying is, and what I say in my film, Diane, is that people do do things like this in these extraordinary situations.
All right.
We
Okay.
should
No.
judge that.
Enough. Michael has to have a say.
Wow. Douglas getting it on immediately with Andrew Neil and the guests there on the show. And they're talking about this report that basically came out in terms of the CIA and torture. And the question has to be asked. First of all, the first question I think is you ask, and then you have to decide in which direction you're going to go. Is torture ever justifiable? If you feel the answer to that is absolutely not, no matter what, it is not justifiable at all, you can't conduct torture at all, well, then you basically have your armed services, your CIA, whatever types of, organizations, departments that are, entrusted with the security of your country, of your nation, and you basically put into law and then put into practice, you're not going to torture. Once you say that, you basically told your enemy that, you know what, if we get captured, guess what? We've got a free pass. They're not going to torture us. They're going to put us in jail. And that's as much as it's going to happen. So guess what, folks? You know what? They can do as please. That's what's going to happen. Exactly. They know your playbook. Now, if you tell everybody that, you know what, torture is justifiable in certain cases, well, then the question is going to be asked, what cases are you talking about? Well, those cases are going to be determined by the security services that you put in place, your CIA, your FBI, whoever that is. In this case, obviously the CIA. Now, again, remember, this was a he said, a she said, she said. The Minority Report and the CIA said a lot of these allegations did not happen. Some of them, to some degree, did happen. The question becomes is, now Douglas is basically saying that, you know what, you can't criminalize your security services. You can't basically do that. Otherwise, people are going to be afraid to do interrogations. And all I'm saying is that if I had credible evidence that certain people had knowledge of an attack to occur or some type of a terrorist activity was going to happen, and you knew that there was somebody involved that had information and it was credible, I definitely would say, you know what, go ahead. Torture should be allowed. Get the information. Let's see what we can, gather from this individual. Let's see what it's going to take to break him so we can get that information and therefore prevent, that attack from happening. And that black lady over there, typical leftist, typical, liberal, just virtue signaling, polishing her halo, coming on the show, basically saying, oh, you know what? This is just absolutely wrong. We can't do torture. We have to be better than ourselves. We have to look to our better angels. This lady has no idea about how to fight a war on terror or how to inculcate into your security services some means of extracting. Standing and listening to music for 24 hours or 48 hours, making them stand, hosing them down with water, waterboarding, all these different things that they're talking about, techniques that they use. I think, like I said, depending on the case, depending on the circumstances, should be allowed to be determined by the people on the ground, not by, Monday arm, quarterbacks, the next day. Anyways, folks, that's what we have on tap for you today. You're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, where I give you my personal prescription from my personal perspective of what's happening in the world when all these things collide, when Douglas Murray, leftists like this lady, Andrew Neil, you've got social justice, people polishing their halos, you've got culture, you've got religion, you've got government, you've got CIA, you've got torture, all these things collide. Let's get back to the interview right now.
The Minority Senate Committee has, in a way, made it morally very straightforward because it claims both that there was torture and that the torture was ineffective in getting intelligence, which was of any use. No, but wait a minute.
The minority or the majority one?
Sorry, the majority. I beg your pardon.
Majority.
Now, if this is the case, of course, the whole thing's very straightforward. Torture is abhorrent, and it wasn't producing any evidence anyway. However, that is not what the CIA says, and I think it becomes vastly more morally complicated if it is the case that some useful evidence was obtained from the torture.
Because the CIA, just to be clear to our viewers who not follow the CIA directors and deputy directors at the time, they are claiming that they did get information which saved lives and stopped attacks. But do we have evidence for that beyond their assertion?
You're never going to get that kind of evidence because it's the CIA. They're not going to tell you their interrogative techniques. They're not going to tell you what kind of information they get because that would compromise everything that they're doing. So you have to take it on that faith that you're either going to decide as a society that you're going to allow to have a system put in place, a department like we did with the CIA, to allow them to make those decisions for the good of the nation, or you're basically going to say we're not going to allow anybody to have that type of legal issue, and we're just going to say absolutely no, and then just quash it, crush it, stop it right from there, and then you don't have to worry about it. And then the ramification of that is that when an attack or a terrorist activity does occur, you just have to say that's the society we want to live in. We'd rather have that happen than play some Britney Spears records to somebody for 24 hours.
No, but I don't know that we have a disproof of it beyond the assertion of the Senate committee.
You've quoted Democratic senators. Let me quote a Republican senator. John McCain has always been vehemently against torture by the American state because he was tortured by the Vietnamese. And he says it never gets you valuable information. So
Diane,
to minimise it.
In his case, it might have not given because he didn't give in.
It's a horrible
I think it was Britney Spears, actually.
Britney Spears,
Diane,
whatever.
But I get your
Diane, a Democrat senator who served throughout the 2000s, the late 90s on these committees, also issued a statement the other day saying that he thought this inquiry was wildly inaccurate. He said, and I think he's correct, that since the 1970s, when these committees for oversight were set up, they have evaded what they were meant to do, and they have become highly politicized.
Yes.
That is
so none
problem.
of the things we've read about happened.
No, Diane,
No,
I'm
that's not
not
what
saying
Douglas
that. I
Everybody
did
else
not
is
say
saying.
that in my film. I said that there are clear moments when they seriously violated the best conduct the United States and its citizens should expect. But that is not to say that every allegation that we have heard in recent years and every allegations that the Democrats on this committee found without speaking to anyone who headed the services are all true. You cannot expect they were always guilty.
One of the things that emerged from it, and this is not disputed, is that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was waterboarded 183 times. Now, that is extraordinary because it is difficult to... if useful information was coming out of the guy, why would you have to do it 183 times? So I found that, as it were, one of the most powerful independent pieces of advice. It looked as if something, absolutely desperate and completely
systemic and
inhuman was
long-running.
happening.
If I
183 times. Maybe it took that long to break him. Did you ever consider that possibility? If you've already got the information from the guy, then yes, I could understand. If he broke, then what would be the need for that? But maybe there were bits and pieces that were coming that they were piecing together, and they knew he had information, and he was just, holding on. There are people, right? You see the movies out there, James Bond withstanding all kinds of torture. Maybe this guy was just as good and finally broke at the 183rd time.
180.
I know, that is an extraordinary thing. There were 3 people who President Bush himself says he knowingly agreed to being waterboarded. That was then agreed to be wrong, and they changed it, and it didn't go on again. But just a very quick thing. President Bush himself said that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's evidence stopped major terrorist
Well, that's what that is one of the claims. But I want to come back. You mentioned Britain and its attitudes. Do we ever get out of jail free card here? I wonder if we do. I mean, tomorrow's papers are going to be full of things of how much did we, the British government, how much did we know at the time? How complicit were we? Were we handing over people that the MI6 or the SAS had picked up? And they knew what was going to be done?
Under a Labour government, under a Labour Foreign Secretary,
Is it your view
David
that they
Miliband.
did know a lot?
We don't know, but I think we need to know. I think we need to know how much they knew or how much they chose not to know. Most British people, Douglas, do not take torture as lightly as you do.
I don't.
And they want to know what the British government knew.
What do you think, Douglas, about our role?
I don't take it lightly, Diane. What I'm saying, and what I think you should take seriously, is that when another attack happens, as has happened before, the British people immediately afterwards say, why wasn't this stopped?
Yes.
That is also a very powerful question.
I wonder if I can
and
ask
when
Diane
they
one other
fail to
on.
answer it, we need to address that.
Michael?
What's your view of drone attacks?
Drone attacks are an act of war.
That's a very helpful answer from President Obama's point
But
of view.
hold on, the
I mean, quite a
drone
lot.
attacks are taking place against people to whom America has not declared war.
But I think there's...
I don't think that-
And an awful lot of people are being killed who have
And
nothing to do with the
I
war.
don't think America was at war with the Afghan weddings that it kicked out.
No, but they felt the Americans understood that they were attacking
The fact is, that
American
Mr.
combatants.
Bush and
No,
but
I think
you
it's
would be screaming from the hills.
I think it's very curious that you are so clear-cut about torture.
Everyone's clear about torture except from Duncan.
And yet you don't think there's a problem with drone attacks.
I'm not saying there's not
Check
a problem.
and
Drone attacks
mate.
are completely
I'm not
lethal, by the way.
saying
Most of the people who are tortured are alive today.
Yeah, but in what state would you want to put
No,
up?
I'm afraid we've run out of time. It's been a fascinating, lively debate. Puts question time into a cocktail. I think. Who needs Russell?
The gentleman just asked that lady, what do you think about drone attacks? And folks, this is exactly the pretzel twisting that liberals, Democrats, leftists do all the time. So slapping somebody a couple of times or more than a couple of times, having them stand for long hours of periods, having water thrown on them, having them ingest water, having them listen to Britney Spears songs or any other songs, light deprivation, sleep deprivation, those things we are going to that is inhuman. That is inhuman. We can't condone torture. We can't do that. We're better than that as a society. That's our thing. But drone attacks, indiscriminate or precise, collateral damage, women and children being killed, targeting because you know someone's at a wedding, a terrorist, but that's the only time you have to get him and you've got to make a choice. Do we just get the terrorist and everybody surrounding him? Or do we wait till he's isolated? Someone's got to make that decision. This lady's okay with that. That's the leftist. That's what you see every single time, folks. That's what happens. Because you know what? They can't judge. Because when you start, it's the thing. The left starts eating its own decisions, its own mantra. One can't be without the other. You can be so against the torture of a human individual, yet dropping a bomb on them from a few thousand miles away, that's perfectly justifiable. I mean, there's an end. At least the gentleman said, the person is still alive after torture. And what does she say to that? She's got an answer for that as well. She goes, well, in what condition is he going to be? He might be in a really bad condition after torture. Well, what condition are you after you get a drone launched missile after you? Your condition is that you're scattered all over God's green earth in a million pieces. Singed, burned, everything. I mean, these people are absolutely unbelievable. And we can all sit on our high perches, on our thrones, polishing our halos, virtue signaling that we're against torture, and it sounds so good to that crowd that believes in that. But then when something bad happens, as Douglas Murray mentioned, everybody's looking to say, hey, how come we didn't get the information? How come we didn't know? What was the CIA doing? What was MI6 doing? What was the FBI doing? How come this happened? On whose watch? And the recriminations start to occur, and it gets politicized one more time. Anyways, folks, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasir. If you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel, like, share, and follow us. Comment down below. You can check out our other videos here and below. My final thought is always, when you're right, and when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.